So yeah, we have a new war in the Middle East. The United States, Israel against Iran. What is Trump thinking? What is Trump doing to the world economy? Who is driving this war? Why is he so destructive in his actions against the US people, against the US interest, against global interests, I would say? Let's find out. Hello everybody, my name is Stavros. I'm a professor of international relations and an advocate for democracy. Let's try and understand a little bit. Let's unpack what has been happening the past 2 weeks and a half right now in the Middle East. Why are Israel and the United States launching this new war, this destructive war, which is driving oil prices up, food prices up? We're going to be hit like a truck is going to hit us pretty soon, I'm afraid. We'll see about that, how things are going to develop. So first and foremost, let us understand why do we have to go through another war in the Middle East. So two people were behind this war, obviously. One was Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and second, it was and it is Donald Trump, the American president. It seems that the Israelis struck first, and it seems that the Israelis they had decided, they were driven, they wanted to attack and decapitate Iran. And they did actually manage to attack and decapitate the Iranian leadership. They assassinated, dozens of Iranian leaders, military leaders, political leaders, including the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. Well, there's a caveat here. Assassinating military leadership is fine as long as you declare war, which they didn't, but, I digress. But you cannot actually target political leadership. It's considered to be a war crime. But, who cares? I mean, is anybody still counting about the war crimes of Benjamin Netanyahu? I think not. I guess not. So yes, Bibi Netanyahu was the one starting this war. And according to the Secretary of State, the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the U.S. thought that this attack was going to happen, that it was incoming by the Israelis against the Iranians. And if that was to happen, then the Iranians would take revenge against U.S. military bases in the Gulf, which is exactly what happened. And that is why they were forced to join the war. Again, instead of talking the Israelis out of attacking Iran, they decided, the Americans said, all right, they're going to do it, so there's nothing we can do about it, and we need to protect our bases, so let's attack preemptively. This is the original sin, the original crime of George W. Bush, the senior, the funny little guy that doesn't know anything about politics, the one who invaded Afghanistan and Iraq based on outright lies, the war criminal. That concept of preemptive attacks, preemptive strikes, that's exactly what Trump did. So that's why they were dragged in this war by the Israelis. It's clear, crystal clear. So Trump doesn't really want this, doesn't need this war. He cannot support politically this war. We have midterm elections coming this November. The American people, only less than 1/3 of the U.S. population backs this war, and it becomes even more unpopular. So yes, nobody really wanted this war in the U.S. It's going to hurt the Republicans big time. Republican politics politicians are going to be really hurt at the polls, or they are hurting at the polls. They're going to be hurt at the election cycle this November. And I guess Trump will not control Congress as he does right now. So he will not be able to, do all the things that you want to do, I guess, that he wants to do for the last leg of his second term in office. So he will not be able to have a free reign on U.S. politics anymore. So he's sacrificing that. And I guess we have to understand, at least try and understand, why is he doing that? Why is he sacrificing his political future? He has more than a couple of years in office, actually, and he's actually creating huge problems for any successor that may come, like J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio in the future. They're going to be dragged in the mud by this debacle. This is a huge military debacle. I would go ahead and call it, at this point in time, actually, even a defeat of the U.S. interests, or the attack was pretty much botched, because yes, they did manage to decapitate and kill Ali Khamenei, but Ali Khamenei is only one man, and the regime still stands. The regime, the Islamic so-called republic, still stands. Nothing pretty much changed. So you can kill people, but if the regime stands, there's nothing you can do to change the regime's policies, right? So the so-called Yeah, obviously there was no strategy here. We can all agree on that. The initial impression was that the U.S. So they managed to they presented many different narratives, and they tried to make some of them stick. Like they said that we want to protect the protesters. There was a delay of 1.5 months actually, because the protests were back in February. But anyway, but they didn't really care about the people of Iran because they committed war crimes. They bombed a school twice actually, a double tap attack, which is exactly what they did in the Caribs. Another war criminal, Pete Hegseth, he killed people in the Caribs that they were already defeated. There were actually people floating on a boat, and he double tapped attack, executing them. They did the same against young kids, young girls, actually aged 6 to 12, an elementary school in Minab. Minab is a city in Iran. It was bombed twice. So, that's a pretty disgraceful, disgusting war crime right there. So they don't care about the people of Iran. That's a joke. Then they said that we want to, bring about regime change. That didn't work. Ali Khamenei died, then his son took over. So, we have a younger Khamenei in place. Nothing really changed. Then they said that actually we wanted to create the conditions so the people of Iran would rise up by themselves. That's not going to happen. The protesters were protesting against their regime, but they didn't want the filthy Trumpian Republican hands all over their country, the paws of the American imperialists in their country. They hate you more than they hate the mullahs, for crying out loud. That's, anybody would hate an outside interventionist imperialistic force than their own dictators, because you are the foreign dictator. Everybody hates you. The world hates you. Even your allies hate you. So, that didn't work. They said that we wanted to limit the nuclear weapon capabilities of Iran or the ballistic missile capabilities of Iran. Yeah, I got news for you. Things are going to get really, really bad in the future, because there was a fatwa, it's like a religious decree by Ali Khamenei that there shouldn't be any nuclear weapons, and that decree stood for as long as he was alive. You guys assassinated him, which is a war crime by itself. Now there's no fatwa limiting Iran's nuclear program. They can have nuclear weapons and their ballistic missile. So all of that, to limit that, you need a regime which is going to be friendly to you and against these programs, the ballistic program and the nuclear program. No such regime is going to be coming into power, because you cannot. The US and Israel failed. This is a failed mission, period. This is a failed mission. They couldn't defeat the Iranian regime. That means that the new regime is more hardcore, more conservative. Any voice that was in Iran that would be like a reformist or someone who would like to approach the West, now they're going to be limited in their power in the country because of having been targeted. So the hardliners they became more powerful. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards are actually more in control now than ever. So these guys failed big time. So this is a failed mission. That's, let's get out of our discussion. So let's focus on why did Trump, made this whole debacle. We have dozens of U.S. Army personnel killed. Actually, he has been saying some pretty crude things against his own military, Trump. He has been exposing himself for a fool, to be honest. He said, and I quote, that you could make the case that maybe we shouldn't even be there at all because we don't need it. We have a lot of oil. We are the #1 producer anywhere in the world ×2. Again, you can make the case that maybe we shouldn't even be there at all. This is Donald Trump admitting that nobody knows why he is there. And people have been sacrificing themselves for these lunatics' imperialistic policies, or is it maybe something more sinister? And yes, I guess you guys can figure it out. There is the Jeffrey Epstein issue here. It seems that, yes, Trump was really involved in that. And it seems that Epstein was a Mossad and CIA agent. He was manipulating people like Donald Trump. And I guess Mossad or Bibi Netanyahu, they have something on Trump. And that is why Trump has been doing whatever the Israelis want him to do, actually. But that's only part of the discussion and the equation. There's a bigger strategy here, and I want you to be aware of it. The bigger strategy is that all of these incidents and wars in the Middle East or against Russia and all that, the actual enemy, the #1 adversary, rather, of the United States is China. China has been surpassing the U.S. on any financial index right now. The back in February there was a security conference in Munich, Germany, and it was said there that the Chinese Navy will overcome the American Navy in 2030. So in a couple of years, the Chinese Navy will be stronger, tougher than the U.S. Navy. Their economy is stronger. Things are getting really bad, and Washington needs to do something, because the real struggle here is hegemony, global hegemony. Who's going to rule the world after the dust settles? And the U.S. is trying everything that they can, and they have this really crazy person, I would say, or naive or delusional, whatever you want to call him, Donald Trump. He's trying to do everything in his power to stop the rise of China, the defeat of the United States at the hands of China. So that is how you can, I guess, realize or understand what's happening in the past couple of months, or more than that, rather. So the capture, or the abduction, rather, of President Maduro of Venezuela was part of that plan. So the strategy here is that you need to limit the allies, or rather the energy trading partners of China. Venezuela was such a country. They were selling most of their oil to the Chinese. Now, by abducting Maduro, which was also a war crime, Donald Trump limited actually neutralized that route. So there's no oil coming anymore from Venezuela to China. That was a big blow. And he actually thought that he could repeat that same thing. He was rather hopeful that he would repeat the same thing in Iraq. Well, guess what? Iraq is not Venezuela, and in Venezuela he won. In this instance, in Iran, he lost big time, and disgracefully so, I may add. So that was part of containing China. Then the war against Russia is part of containing China, because Russia has been selling almost nowadays, I guess 80% of their hydrocarbons are exported in China. The only people who can make business with the Russians are Indians, with, I don't know, with a caveat maybe, as an exemption maybe, and then the Turks, and then the Chinese. They're the ones who can import the hydrocarbons of Russia. So attacking Russia was part of that containment policy, which it began back in 2014 in the so-called Euromaidan in Ukraine, which was a coup orchestrated by the Democrats at the time. Remember, Victoria Nuland, the war criminals, Jeffrey Pyatt. We had this scumbag as an ambassador in Athens under the Obama administration. That's when this began. And then obviously in the Biden administration, they perfected the plan. They executed the plan. So yes, this has to do with the U.S. deep state. They realized that they're going to lose the war for global hegemony against China, and they attacked Russia. That is why the American Navy, they actually tried to stop the shadow fleet of the Russians, and they captured a Russian vessel for the first time ever, and they did that offshore Iceland or offshore Scotland, somewhere around these waters, and they took over a Russian vessel which was selling oil to the Chinese. That was part of that as well. Then we have the Israelis and the Emiratis, who are part of that alliance with the Americans. They tried to control the Red Sea by doing a couple of things. They instigated an offensive inside Yemen. There was an alliance inside. So inside Yemen, we have two large forces. We have the Houthi, which are linked with Iran, and we have the so-called Saudi-led coalition. The UAE was part of that coalition, but then they betrayed the Saudis, and they attacked against the Saudi-led coalition as a third party, I guess, in the country, because they wanted to create a new country called South Yemen. And this is actually an entity that existed in the past. So the Emiratis, which are really big allies of Israel and the U.S., they wanted to control that part of the exit from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, the Gulf of Aden. And on the other side of the Gulf is Somalia, and specifically a breakaway part of that country, which is called Somaliland. And Israel recognized that part of land, and they wanted to build there some bases. And we had ministers traveling there from Israel to Somaliland. So that was also part of that effort to control both coasts of the Gulf of Aden and the exit from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. So you can see, because obviously these are oil flows, you can control oil through that and limit what goes or flows from that part of the world, and you can limit the you can put pressure on the Chinese as well. And finally, that is the last stroke that we're seeing right now, right here, is against what's happening against the Chinese. So all of the Iranians, sorry. So you can see that actually all of these attacks are basically attacks against the Chinese, their own suppliers of oil and natural gas. And that is why, so I guess you can say that there is this bigger strategy to contain China, and we can see all these different conflicts as they become apparent if you connect the dots in the world. But this specific war, I guess, it was driven by Benjamin Netanyahu. There's going to be elections in Israel this October, and he would like to be a big winner of this war and go to elections, and maybe because he has there's a big trouble for personal troubles for Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's accused of bribery, of corruption. He is corrupt to the core. He's fighting for his political life. He's fighting for his freedom. Maybe he would like to get some kind of form of a deal in the country, especially if he's a war hero against Iran. So I guess it was driven by him. The link with Epstein made certain that Trump would be on board, even though it's going to be hurtful for him in the elections coming November. But the bigger picture here is that yes, indeed, the U.S. wanted to attack the allies of the Chinese, and we see this again all across the board. So I guess there is a couple of things that need to be said as well, and that has to do with what's going to happen next, which is in everybody's minds. Everybody asking me about this. So we need to be certain that we need to be sure. I need to make this crystal clear that if the war doesn't end, it's going to hurt for everybody, right? So basically, we are dealing with a global oil crisis that's going to hit us like a truck. We haven't felt it yet because two reasons. There is some form of sanctions relief against Russia, and against Russia started selling oil to other players as well. But that's not going to fix things because the Russian product was already in the supply. Everything is supply and demand. So that was already in the market. The problem is that the Strait of Hormuz is closed and that part of the supply is gone while demand stays the same. What the countries of the world decided to do was to release their strategic reserves of oil and natural gas. This means basically product that they have in storage. Like China has the largest reserves. They're underground. They have been stocking product and now they're using that. They're burning through their stock, basically. That's going to have an expiration date. It's not going to last forever. The stocks are going to go down, period, and then we're going to be dealing with the actual oil crisis. I guess as long as the war continues, we're going to have to deal with that. That's part of the problem. We also have a food crisis coming because guess what? Everything runs on oil, unfortunately, and natural gas, actually, especially food. So you need heavy machinery, like tractors. They use oil, obviously, in the fields. Then you use oil and electricity for refrigerators to keep your food fresh, and producers to keep their produce fresh. Then you need to transport these the food, and you're using trucks or whatever. Obviously, they are running on oil as well. Also, we need fertilizers, and the basic ingredient for fertilizers is actually natural gas. That also has been hurt a lot. Qatar, which is exporting a lot of natural gas for the global markets, they stopped exporting. So you can understand how that's going to affect food prices globally. So if you add these two indexes, or I guess factors or aspects of global economy like food and energy, that's going to create a huge financial crisis. And again, this has two people who are responsible, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. This is disgraceful. Right now, they're dealing with a crisis that they cannot fix the problem. They created a mess in the Strait of Hormuz. They cannot control the Strait of Hormuz. Everybody's going to suffer. Their bases in the region have been targeted by Iran, and I guess the Iranians have been getting support and intel and satellite data from both the Chinese and the Russians to make these attacks more sophisticated. But yes, they have been targeting successfully U.S. military bases in the region. And I guess it seems right now to the U.S. allies that having a military base is more of a problem, creates a target on your head, than actually provides security. So this is a huge loss credibility-wise. The respect that the U.S. enjoyed is it's up in the winds. Nobody's respecting the U.S. than as they did before this war started. Again, they're burning through the goodwill, the capital that they had in the region and abroad. It seems that the Iranians are tough not to crack. Hezbollah is reborn from its ashes. Things are really, really bad in the region. Many people have been suffering. Many people have been dying from both sides. But it seems that there's no clear strategy, no end on the horizon. Things will get way, way worse before they get better. That's how things stand at the moment. And again, I guess the scenarios would be that the U.S. should have to admit defeat because, again, let me repeat here that you need to bring about regime change if you want to stop the ballistic missile program or the nuclear program of Iran. So since they fail to do that, they're going to have to admit defeat. Period. So I don't see how Trump can admit defeat without humiliating. I guess people who have a working brain, they see him as being humiliated by. I don't think he is such a problematic human being. He would never be able to admit defeat or that he made a mistake. That's a big problem to have in a major global power in the presidency. But yes, that's what we're dealing with. So they have to admit defeat. Oh, they have to create a narrative that they want somehow. I guess we can say, yeah, humanity can tell Trump that yeah you won, that's all right, you can get that as long as we stop fighting. So we can stop fighting and he can keep dreaming. I guess that's one way to deal with this, with a narrative of win. I guess the US, the administration, the White House, and all these cronies that surround Trump, they can help him, they can persuade him, or things can get really, really bad. We may see an escalation in the region. Maybe you can see some tactical nuclear weapons being employed either by the U.S. or Israel. Israel has illegally, actually, as a rogue state, would have nuclear weapons. That's how Israel has nuclear weapons. They shouldn't have nuclear weapons. So maybe that's also in the works. We'll see. But if things go really, really bad, and if major countries like China, they burn through their stocks, oil stocks and what have you, things could get really, really bad for everybody. But, the Chinese and the Indians, they get an exemption by the Iranians. They have a bilateral deal, and they still trade with the Iranians. They still get some of their oil from that part of the world. So it's going to hurt more for the West who is paying the bill for this lunacy, for this imperialistic scheme or, experiment of Trump and Netanyahu. We'll see what happens. If any major things happening, I'll keep you updated in this channel. Thank you for watching this video. If you did like what you saw, please make sure to like and subscribe. There's more videos actually coming. Let's keep raising the black. Let's keep discussing about these things openly, freely, without anybody trying to stifle or censor us. This is a voice for freedom in this difficult times, I would say. Thank you. Have a good one. So I was laughing the other day because Trump, remember when he was putting pressure on NATO, he was blaming them, he was calling them names and all that, and then he was, in essence, attacking them by saying we want Greenland, we want Denmark to capitulate and all that. Now he remembered NATO and he said, we want you to help us, bail us out from the Strait of Hormuz because we suck. We cannot do anything. We need you guys. Not only that, he's not asking them in a good way, like asking nicely and politely. He's threatening them. He's saying, if you guys don't help us out, you don't bail us out in the mess that we created in the Strait of Hormuz by sending your Navy to help us, very, very bad things are going to happen for NATO in the future. So he's threatening the people that he's asking for support and help because he sucks and he created a mess in this part of the world. So this is crazy. So General Kane, who is the chairman of the chiefs of staff in the US, like the general running the show, he actually said to Trump that A, we have a limited amount of munitions to join in this war, and B, we have limited support from our allies. Nobody's backing Trump. People actually hate Trump, hate his guts, and people, global population, actually, especially in the West, in the European Union that I live in, they are really against not just Netanyahu, but Trump as well, the Israeli policies and the American policies. There is going to be a price, and I think that the United States is going to pay that price.